Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Ancient Andes podcast. I'm your host, Jesse Wolf, and I'm coming to you live and direct from colorful Colorado. Today, we have a very special podcast as I sit down with one of the pioneers of YouTube archaeology and world-famous author and tour guide, Brien Foerster. Brien is well known for his features on the History Channel's Ancient Alien series. He has extensive experience visiting and researching ancient sites all over the world, and we are so grateful to have him be a part of the program today. If you're enjoying these podcasts, make sure you subscribe and share wherever you listen. We are extremely grateful for your support as we continue to grow. Thank you. Guys, just a little bit of house cleaning. Brien also has two wonderful dogs, and they are also very knowledgeable, and they would like to say a few things in this podcast as well. So please listen to them just as you listen to Brien and I, okay? Thank you so much and enjoy the show. All right, welcome back to the Ancient Andes podcast. Today I'm here with my guest, Brien Foerster. Brien, how are you?
I'm fine, thanks, Jesse. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much, Brien, for being with us. Brien, before we begin, I have to tell you how grateful I am for all your incredible hard work and dedication. Your YouTube videos are what first spurred my interest in learning about the ancients. I've read many of your books and always enjoy your segments on the History Channel. I thank you for all your contributions to our community and for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thank you, and to your listeners.
Absolutely. So today, Brien, we are going to discuss the megalithic fortress of Sacsayhuaman above Cusco City in Peru. This is astonishing sight, continues to baffle people today as to how these giant stones were quarried, transported, and placed perfectly into position. Some of these stones weigh up to 125 tons or more. Many theories have been presented as to what the purpose of the site served. No doubt it served many purposes, as the entire sector of Sacsayhuaman is quite massive and extends for many square kilometers. Brien, when was your first trip to Cusco?
About 15 to 16 years ago.
Okay, so relatively recently in your life.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and did you know about Sacsayhuaman before you went there, or did you hear about it while you were in Cusco?
No, I did some research before I went to Peru the first time, and so of course I looked up Machu Picchu, and I looked up Sacsayhuaman and Ollantaytambo, and the other major megalithic sites. But I was in complete shock when I actually got to see them in person, which of course is what happens, because photographs show you one thing, but when you're actually standing next to these things, you know, it's a completely different experience.
It's mind-boggling. I still get goosebumps every time I think about it, especially that first time when I walked upon Sacsayhuaman. I was just in awe of the sheer size and scale. Like you say, photos just don't do it justice. And Brien, tell me, what was your first experience at the site like?
Just in complete shock of the scale of the mainly the first row of stones. As you said, some way up to 125 tons. The quarry is believed to be maybe 3 miles away, though some people think it could be much farther away. And you can clearly see that the work done above that was done by the Inca, whereas the work below, the megalithic stuff, had to have been done by an older civilization, a lot older than the Inca.
I completely agree with you. How do you think the site was constructed, Brien? Do you have any ideas or theories? What tools or technologies do you think were in use?
Well, I think it's a technology that, honestly, that we don't have even to this day. I think somehow whoever did this work was able to make stone malleable for a very short period of time. And so the stones somehow were cut from the quarry, transported likely by levitation of some kind, and then made into almost like a marshmallow consistency. And then once put into place, and once the stone settled, that's the way that it fit perfectly in with all of those around it.
What are some of the wildest theories that you have heard of that the use of Sacsayhuaman?
Well, of course, the most common idea is that it was used as a fortress, you know, which is kind of logical because it does look like that, and that's what the Spanish automatically called it.
Mhm.
But you know, I don't think anybody honestly knows what its original function was. It does look like it was defensive because the first tier of the wall is so high that obviously it'd be very difficult for somebody to try, you know, a normal person to try to climb up it.
Right.
So that's, you know, that's the most common idea.
And what do you think the purpose of the plaza or the reservoir was? You know how there's that big space where it looks almost like a plaza, but some people say that it was actually an artificial lagoon. Do you have a theory on that?
Well, yeah, I base a lot of what I know on local knowledge. And so from what
Mhm.
I've heard from local experts, they say that it was actually an Inca period um, performance area of some kind. And that's also why there's the tunnel at the end of it, because they could fill, you know, they could seal the tunnel off and then channel water into what would be a reservoir and fill it up. If they wanted to do that and make it a reservoir, they could also use it once full of water for celestial studies, like patterns of stars and planets and things like that. But then if it was drained, then it would be like a giant performance space in the center with the stairs that encircle it as being the sitting places of a stadium.
So similar to today, how we see Inti Raymi kind of take over the entire section, probably in earlier times, that area was maybe chosen for the ceremony.
Right.
Okay, fantastic. And tell me, Brien, what is your favorite part of the site? Do you have one spot in particular?
It's, as you know, it's so complex and, you know, huge in scale. It's something like 1,000 acres. You know, the official site is. It includes Kenko and Little Kenko and other sites in the area. It's mainly the big megalithic wall that I find the most impressive, and everybody that I take there, you know, they're just gobsmacked once they see the actual scale of it. They can't believe it.
Mm-hmm. And what about Ñaupa Huaca? This is kind of, I hope my pronunciation's okay. This is kind of like the old tower section. Many of the Spanish conquistadors, when they first arrived, they said that there were two large towers that were on top of the fortress, if you will. And what do you think those possibly could have served purpose for, Brien? I have it hard to believe that they were just chulpas or something like that, or storage places, you know?
Yeah, I think they were probably used as observation towers
Okay.
for watching to see if enemies were, you know, possibly going to attack. They could also have been used for stargazing by astronomers. And of course, they were deconstructed during the colonial Spanish time for building material for Cusco. It's very fortunate for us that they didn't bother trying to remove the big megalithic blocks, because if they could have, they would have. But I guess they chose to use and recycle all of the Inca stuff first.
Absolutely. Yeah, I have to say, I was living right below Sacsayhuaman for about 1.5 years in San Cristobal, and sometimes at night I would go up there and sneak in. I don't recommend people do that; it's not safe. But on a couple of times, I actually climbed all the way up to the top and entered Ñaupa Huaca, where you're not supposed to go. And I sat in that circle, and the energy that you feel when you sit down in there is quite palpable. It's a very energetic would be the word that I would use. And there's also channels that run off of the circle. So it makes it look like there might have been water that might have been running. I don't know. It's very interesting though. So many mysteries in that place. And one of the most mysterious parts, not of the actual site, but in the sector, is the Zona X, another site that I have become familiar with because of you, Brien. So let's dive into it, because this is for me one of the most fascinating. Brien, can you tell us what the Chicanas are?
Chincana is an Inca word which means tunnel. So there are,
I'm
I
sorry,
think,
Chincana. Yeah, my
yeah,
apologies. I said Chicana. I'm Chincana, I
that's
meant to
okay.
say.
Yeah, Chincana. And so there are at least 19 of them that are at the site called Zone X or Zone XA that you can climb through. One of them is long enough that it takes, you can stand up straight and walk through it. It takes about a minute and a half to go from one end to the other. It does appear that it was a natural formation, but then somebody, probably the Inca, widened and maybe raised the ceiling level so that it was easy to be able to traverse through it. But there are numerous tunnels there, and we also see megalithic evidence like we see at almost all the ancient sites. So somebody was there before the Inca and made constructions, then the Inca adopted the site and expanded on it.
And in this site, I've been a couple of times. I actually took a class of my students up there when I was teaching them English, and we took a field trip to the Zone X. They loved it. But there is one section there, Brien, where it opens up into like a little courtyard, and there is a big sign on the wall that says "No entrada." And there is a series of almost perfectly formed stone staircase going down into the earth. And me and my buddy, we just went down into the first room, but from there are like 3 different tunnels going off into different areas. And we stopped and we went up because we had heard so many stories of people getting lost and that it's not safe. But I'm curious as to if you have explored deeper, or if you want to, have you thought about getting a research team and exploring, or is that off limits due to the government?
Yeah, if you're not an official archaeologist, then it's very difficult to do things like that. So it's better to do like what you did, just kind of on the sly. Whenever you get an opportunity to go into a space that supposedly is off limits, the best thing to do is to take the chance and enter and wait and see if an official comes and kicks you out. Because as you know, the Peruvians are very polite people.
Right.
And so, quite often you can access areas that are completely supposedly off limits, whereas in Egypt, it's much more difficult. In Egypt, almost everybody carries a gun. And so you're more likely to get in trouble in Egypt than you are in Peru, going in supposedly off limit areas.
Yeah, I only had one bad encounter, and that was at the site of Pucara above Tipon. They were excavating that site and it wasn't completely finished. And me and a friend went over there and checked it out, and there were ceramics everywhere. And so we checked out the site, and when we were getting ready to leave, they made a roadblock. They made a roadblock in the middle of the road with stones, and they wouldn't let us pass. And they said, "No tourists here." And it was pretty scary. They had some knives in their hands and stuff, but finally we were able to talk our way out of it. But yeah, I agree. For the most part, I haven't had any issues, and especially in Zona X, I've never even seen another person there. So fascinating though. Thank you, Brien. And now, Brien, I would like to shift to, I think, my favorite site on this planet, and another site that I wouldn't know about if it wasn't for you. So thank you. We're going to talk about the Ñaupa Huaca, or also called the Ñaupa Iglesia. The Ñaupa Huaca, I'll let you describe it better, Brien.
Okay, well, the funny thing about that site is that the standard name is Ñaupa Iglesia. Ñaupa is an Inca term, which means ancient, and Iglesia, of course, is Spanish. So a friend of mine, Wilco, and I decided to rename it Ñaupa Huaca to make it a true Inca name, and so fortunately that name has caught on. But it's almost like a scene from Star Trek, because you go down this what was a dirt road and is now a paved road from this little village called Pachar, which is pretty close to Ollantaytambo, and then you climb up a long series of stairs into a cave, which obviously was cut from the bedrock itself. And the material seems to be like a serpentine of some kind. But there you have these 3 niches, which the Inca used for ceremony. And then you have this false door, which is based on natural proportions, like divine geometry.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very much out of place. I have heard that there is something very similar to it above that location, but I haven't been able to actually reach it yet. But it's a very intriguing, to some degree, one of a kind site, more or less in the middle of nowhere, which still isn't visited too frequently by tourists.
Yeah, it's definitely getting more popular over these years, but like you say, it's still one of the unknown places. When I first went, it was 2016, and like you say, it was just the dirt road and following the tracks of the train to Machu Picchu. And now when I've gone back, obviously they have the new highway in place to make it a shorter distance. And yeah, I'm not a fan, Brian. I have to say, I feel like that highway has kind of ruined a little bit the ambiance of that area, but what can you do? And it's always closed anyway because of landslides. They should have never put it in the first place. But anyway, that's a different subject. As to speaking about on top, I've actually climbed on top. So if you go around the side, there's a little room, kind of looks like the Inca built a little house maybe on the side. And from there you can get up on top. And up on top, there's a couple of cave entrances that go back down into where the Ñaupa Huaca is. It smells terrible, Brian. I'm not sure if that's because people have made sacrifices or if it's due to bats, but it smells quite repulsive. And then from there, you can continue up and you can see some Inca stonework along the side of the wall. And there it splits up. So you can go left and go up or towards like Piramuyek and Sokma, or you can go around the corner and head up towards Ollanta. But both of those trails kind of deteriorate rather quickly. So I'd be fascinated to explore more of that area as well. I didn't know that there's supposed to be something else above it.
Yeah, well, I've seen one photograph, and it looks like there are about 5 of the 3 seating area stone, carved out of the bedrock. Basically, yes. I've heard that there are 5 of those in a row, and it's actually on top of the mountain. So there is an access road, I have heard from a friend of mine, that allows you to get up there, but I haven't been able to venture there yet.
That sounds like a great adventure. Definitely have to look into that. Yeah. Why was it built, Brian? Why do you think this place, I mean, the amount of time and energy that it must have taken to complete this site is mind-boggling, especially when you look at the primitive tools that these quote-unquote people had.
Well, that's the big question. The Inca, like with everything, the Inca used that space as a ceremonial space based upon their belief system. Some people think that it was originally some kind of portal, like energetic portal, whereby you could communicate using sound or vibration of some kind with other locations nearby or possibly even farther away. And I'm leaning more towards that being the original function.
And there's another site that you're very well aware of close to Lake Titicaca, where we see a similar design. It's not as sharp, but it's probably more spiritually important. Can you help me with the name? Amaru
Muru.
Amaru Muru. Thank you, Brian. Do you think there's any connections between the 2 of those sites?
Well, it could be, because again, that location looks as if it was again used as some kind of energetic portal. It's not as well crafted as Ñaupa Huaca is. The stone is quite a bit softer. It's a red sandstone. It's not even, like, it's not bilaterally symmetrical. But if you talk to the local people, they tell really interesting stories about lights and orbs and things coming through the portal at night, and a lot of the local villagers are afraid to go there after the sun goes down because it's such an energetic, strange location.
Yeah, and it's fascinating, Brian. I spoke with a wisdom keeper in Ollantaytambo. He's a very old man. His name is Vidal, and he has a big beard. He looks like Santa Claus a little bit. And when I told him about my trip to Ñaupa Huaca, first thing he said was Atlantis. You said the Atlanteans. So I take that with a grain of salt, but there are local lores that, these people had connections to Atlantis. So I know that that's a little bit far-fetched, but I know that there have been theories about Atlantis being in Lake Titicaca and things like that. So I do find it fascinating, but I think that everything should be taken with a grain of salt for sure.
Yeah, that's true. There are a lot of local people who talk about connections with Atlantis
and Lemuria.
Or Mu. That's true. One of the stories is that in the Coricancha in Cusco, which was the most sacred of all Inca structures, there was a giant gold disc on the wall, which had been inherited by the Inca from the quote unquote Lemurians or Mu people, and was kept by the Inca for safekeeping. So when the Spanish arrived in Cusco to loot the city of all of its gold and silver, supposedly this giant gold disc was taken down and moved to Lake Titicaca and thrown into the lake, into the deep part of the lake, so that the Spanish couldn't get access to it, because the Inca, again, claimed that it wasn't their possession, but they were simply the keepers of a very fascinating ancient artifact.
So how does that tie into the theory of Pachacutec, Brien? Because everyone's heard of the magic disc, and they talk about, Pachacutec became in possession of this disc that came from the sky, and after he had this disc that he was able to do all of these amazing things. You buy that, or are you more into the theory that this stuff was created a long time ago and the Incas found these sites, restored them, and worshiped them?
Yeah, I think there's been too much emphasis on that one Inca ruler called Pachacutec. And there are stories actually that there was what was called the King's List, which actually represented something like 160 Inca in succession, not the 12 or 13 that most people know about. So that extends the timeline of the Inca by thousands of years. And Pachacutec could refer to not a person, but a title. So there could have been 8 or 10 Pachacutecs. But yeah, unfortunately, all the archaeologists and most local guides say that this one Pachacutec constructed everything, including the Coricancha and Machu Picchu and Ollantaytambo and Sacsayhuaman, etc., which is clearly impossible. The Inca had a big workforce, but nothing of that scale.
No, and again, these tools, what tools are we using? So
exactly.
If it's bronze chisels, that's going to be quite the endeavor. I'm sure he was a very tired man after it was finished. But
exactly.
Okay, Brien, I don't want to keep you too much longer. I'm extremely grateful for your time, Brien, and I always learn something when we talk, and I would love to have you on again in the future. Brien, can you tell us about what you're currently working on right now?
Sure. Well, we have a number of tours that are coming up now, which is good because it's been a very difficult couple of years, as everyone knows. But yeah, we have a tour starting in about 10 days in Cusco in the Sacred Valley and Lake Titicaca and Nazca area. And then in September, I'm supposed to be going to a conference in California. Then November, we have another big tour of Peru, which is already sold out. And awesome. Then April of next year, I'm going back to Egypt for my 9th time. And what's going to fill in the time between now and all of that, I'm not sure. But luckily, tourism is starting to come back here in Peru. Foreigners are coming back now. So things are starting to look good again.
Good. And I highly recommend everybody check out your website, hiddenincatours.com. Brien, when people purchase your books on Amazon, do you prefer that they go directly to your site to purchase books, or does it not matter too much if they get it off of Amazon or whatever?
If they want a paper version, it's better to go through Amazon because I don't have copies of the books in paperback to ship to anybody. And it's Amazon is good to work with just in terms of it's such a huge corporation that if they're in Australia, they're printed in Australia. If they're in Europe, they're printed in Europe. If they're in the US, they're printed in the US, etc. So yeah, I don't really mind. Most of the book sales are through Amazon anyway, and it saves on distribution costs and all that kind of thing.
Okay, excellent. And please, ladies and gentlemen, check out his website. He has amazing information on so many sites, and he also has information on his tours there. It's hiddenincatours.com. That's Inca with a C. And Brien is spelled B-R-I-E-N, Foerster, F-O-E-R-S-T-E-R. And you can check out his YouTube page. He has hundreds of videos, possibly thousands. I don't even know how many you've got now, Brien, but there is a huge library and a treasure trove of information on ancient sites. So thank you again, Brien, for all your excellent work. And I really look forward to speaking with you again.
Okay, that'll be a pleasure, Jesse. Thank you so much.
You as well, Brien. Take care and we'll speak soon.
Okay, great.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.